do want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. As I mentioned prior to us getting started, I'm incredibly excited to have these two individuals on this evening and incredibly eager to learn from them. This particular area is not my area of expertise. And so I certainly like to find other industry professionals who know what I don't know and know what I don't know I don't know. And then I just like to learn from them. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to stream this and have people join us in case if you guys have questions that I don't know to ask. Obviously, put those in the chat down at the bottom. We've got several areas. It's going to be a very comprehensive discussion this evening. So we're going to cover a lot of ground. But yeah, so we'll probably run for, I'd say, 90 minutes or so. And then if you have any questions or any comments or any feedback for us, please just drop that in the chat. After the meeting is over, you should receive an email that's essentially a survey asking, your opinion of the event, how we did, all that kind of stuff. And we greatly appreciate your feedback there because that helps me to understand what kind of information you guys are wanting more of and how to deliver that information in a way that is impactful and that you get value from. And so with that said, I'd like to introduce our two panelists. Actually, I'm sorry, if you're not familiar with me at all, my name's Jon. I am one of the managing partners with Fortune Management, which is a practice management organization. We're headquartered off the West Coast. And then I have several partners here in the Southeast, and collectively our footprint spans from Tennessee and all of its bordering states. So I spend a lot of time traveling, which I enjoy, but we have a whole team of coaches here in the Southeast that support our clients with growth and leadership development, communication, et cetera. Been doing that for quite a while and love it, passionate about it, couldn't imagine doing anything else. And so I intend to do that until the day I have the option to retire. So don't know that I want to retire, but I definitely want the option to. And so my two colleagues here down on the bottom, I'm not sure how your screen is displayed, but on my screen, Clint's down at the bottom, Clint Johnson with Profitable PPO. And then Clint, if you don't mind, I'll kind of give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and give a little background.
Sure. So thanks, Jon. I'm excited to be here and talking with dental offices is something like you I'm passionate about. I am fortunate to have been in dentistry all my life. My father was a dentist. My grandfather was a dentist. My great-grandfather was a dentist. So I've just been fortunate to be around the dental industry all my life. And for the last 20 years have been on the consulting side, specifically the insurance optimization side. And so we're based out of Phoenix, Arizona, and we're lucky enough to work with practices in every single state in the country. And in any typical week, I'll probably look at 30 or 40 practices. And our passion, the thing that we love to do is to help practices to understand what their options and their opportunities are to improve their PPO fees. And then in working with professionals like Jon and Teresa, ultimately what we want to see our practices do, our clients do, is reduce the number of PPOs and put in systems and marketing that allows a practice over time to reduce their dependence on PPOs and hopefully at some point, if the doctor would like, to eventually go fee for service. But our particular narrow niche is just improving the PPO fees and dealing with the PPO participation.
Very good. And then on the upper left-hand corner, we've got Teresa Duncan, who is a Lifetime Achievement Award winner with the Academy of Dental Office Managers. That was their annual meeting down in Orlando. Is that right?
Yeah, we just had it and they surprised me. It's really hard to surprise me, but my friends managed to do it. So we kind of have a love-hate relationship right now. But it was total surprise. So thanks for mentioning that because that's a fresh one. I like to say that I've done pretty much every position in the dental office that doesn't require a license. So I started out, I did everything, sterilized, assisted, and got a really good handle on the clinical side of dentistry before my boss basically gently said, you really don't need to be back here. You really need to be up front with the patients and the computer and stop messing up my setups and that type of thing. I was a really bad assistant. So they sent me up front, and that's when I learned insurance was really fun. So my goal in life is to make insurance fun for people because it's not fun. Usually it's a pain point, but I like to make it fun. So I teach, I write about it. I have podcasts about it and webinars about it. It's a little bit bizarre, but if you really are looking to get into the insurance side of it, where it's the coding and the claims and how to make sure that you're talking to your patients correctly, then you'll probably want to look and see what I have to offer. But if that's not your jam, you may want to just dip your toe in the water a little bit because it can be overwhelming. So, but I'd like to think that I'm converting a whole new generation of insurance nerds. That's kind of my goal.
I want to acknowledge you too, because for two reasons. One reason is I see how active you are with the literature that you create and produce in your podcast and your involvement on social media and with ADOM. And clearly this is something that you're very passionate about. And so I'm always intrigued to align myself with and converse with other people who are very passionate about the field that they're in, because I don't know that there's as much of that as there really should be. A lot of people are kind of in the field that they're in because it was convenient and it paid the bills, but they're not really doing what they truly love to do. And I would love to see more people really chase that. And so, my second acknowledgement to you is I think you've created an incredible example for a lot of administrative team members and clinical team members for that matter, because for a dental practice, there's kind of a ceiling, there's only so far up you can go. And I think a lot of people get locked into that, lead assistant role, and that's kind of the end of the road, or, lead hygienist or office manager, and they aspire to maybe that level, but they kind of see that as the end.
Yeah.
And you provide a very good example that says that's not the end. The dental industry is a big industry.
Oh my goodness.
There are a lot of opportunities, career opportunities. So, I mean, if you've kind of maxed out your role or position in the dental practice, unless that practice is expanding and scaling into maybe a DSO or multi-location model, which creates layers of management there are plenty of other opportunities out there that you could potentially pursue and build a very lucrative career doing something that you're really passionate about. So you've provided a very good example there for a lot of people.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that very much. Thank you.
Okay. And with that said, I wanted to just kind of piggyback off of what Clint mentioned before we got started. And then again, as he was introducing himself, which is, I think one concept for most people to understand is that dental insurance is far from the enemy. I think it gets a bad reputation. And this is just my personal opinion. So you guys are welcome to disagree with me. Right? But I think dental insurance is a very effective marketing platform. Essentially, it's an expensive marketing platform, but they come and they say, "Hey, listen." And this works with any service out there. It's completely risk-free marketing program. You don't pay us unless we send you patients. Mm-hmm. No flat cost, no monthly fee. You don't pay us anything unless we send you patients. But if we do, we're going to charge you a little bit more per patient than you would pay if you would work with this marketing company and pay them a flat fee of $3,000 a month. So, it's really just a business decision that we're making that says, okay, I'll participate in this insurance plan and they'll send me new patients. Well, like Clint said, over the course of your career, you should aspire to get away from the dependency on insurance plans, because earlier in your career, and I'll just be blunt. I hope I don't offend anybody, but the same thing is true in my career. I'm better now at what I do than I was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I would hallucinate that Clint and Teresa are better now at what they do than they were 10, 15 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you probably charge more now than you did 10 or 15 years ago.
Yes. Thankfully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, dentists should do the same thing. Earlier in your career, you're not as fast. You're probably not as comprehensive. You probably don't provide as many services. Your team's probably not as good on the phone. You don't provide as good of an experience. And so from the perception of the patient, you're not as valuable to them as you will be when you acquire the skills and the language and the tools and the strategies and all that stuff to provide that type of experience and relationship. So the perceived value is lower and therefore they're willing to pay less. That's where insurance participation comes in, because it helps us to build an active patient base, which a young practice is very dependent upon. But as you grow, now you're better at a lot of these things and you're more valuable now. You've built trust and relationship and rapport. And so you should reach a point at some point in your career where you can begin to navigate away from insurance plans and move yourself more towards a fee-for-service oriented business model. I think that couldn't be more true and more needed than it is today, simply because of some of the repercussions that we're facing because of COVID. And there seems to be a declining population of industry professionals that are available to work in dental practices. Yeah. And therefore, what it costs us to employ those people starts to go up. And if you're locked into insurance reimbursements, you're going to see your payroll percentage, start to climb up. And so we want to be able to control those variables. That's what any, sound business person would want to do, is control their variable costs. And so navigating away from insurance participation or mitigating the impact that insurance participation has on the practice are certainly necessary in order to control the bottom line and make sure that we sustain the financial health of the business. And then I'll tell this one kind of a joke. I had a client of mine over in Memphis that said that he was visited the dental school and he saw two dental students sitting on a bench complaining about doing dentures. And one of them looked at the other one. He says, "Man, I hate doing dentures." And the other one looked back at him and said, "Man, I hate doing dentures too." And then he walked up to him and said, "What are y'all complaining about?" And he said, "Oh, we're just talking about how we hate doing dentures." And he said, "Yeah, I remember there was a time when I hated doing dentures too." And they were like, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, I hated doing dentures, but I love them now." And they were like, "Well, what changed?" And he said, "Well, when I hated doing dentures, I just decided to charge more. And then I still hated doing dentures, so I charged a little more. I still hated doing dentures, so I charged a little more. And I just kept raising my fees until I loved every denture that I did. I do a lot fewer of them now, but I love every one that I do." And so I think that concept is very true with our discussion tonight, in that you need to be compensated fairly for the time and the energy that you invest in your patients. And there are a lot of inefficiencies that I find that are very, very common in the dental industry throughout practices across the country that are easy to clean up. And a couple of those inefficiencies are part of what our discussion tonight is about. So with that said, that was a long introduction. So I apologize for that. If you see me taking notes, that's because I'm trying to absorb as much information as I can.
I gotcha.
I'll check the chat box real quick before we get started. And so the first point of discussion this evening is going to be best practices for discontinuing participation.
Well, can we circle back to what you had to say, though? Because the whole thing about the contract, there's consideration. You enter into this contract, you agree to do 20, 30%. You find out it's much more once you talk to somebody like Clint. It's 20, 30% is what they say. And in return, you're supposed to get all these new patients. So that's the consideration on both ends. But we also, along the way, had a real crazy adjustment of our expectations when it comes to participation. So say the patient has a $1,500 yearly benefit. It's almost like every office thinks that $1,500 is going to just come sliding into our office with no problem. But the fact is we have to file our claims. We have to make our cases. We have to have good documentation. And so there's a lot of anger that comes up, and I understand it because it seems like the goalposts change a lot, but there seems to be this, why do they make it so hard to give us the 1,500? But when you look at it from a business point of view, the insurance companies, their client is the employer, and they have a duty to their employer to save the money that they can. And depending on what kind of contract they signed, they have to do that. So if you look at it from their point of view, they're trying to do the best for their client. We're trying to do the best for our patient. And somewhere in the middle, there's a miscommunication, and we end up getting very adversarial. And I have found over the years, I've worked with insurance people for years. I have many of them as good friends. They're just like us. They just have a different set of rules. They don't wake up in the morning and go, "How am I going to screw Teresa's clients over?" They don't do that. But the rules that are put forth in these policies can be very, very hard to deal with. So it's not that they're out to get us. It's just that they have the ability to weight the game in their favor a lot more. So I think let's just make sure that the expectations are that, yes, it's not going to be easy to be an insurance coordinator, to be a heavily participating insurance practice. yes, Clint can get you great fees. Jon, you can help them with all of the services and all of that. But if your insurance coordinator is sitting on the side and can't get any claims paid because doctors don't document or whatever, then of course it's going to seem a lot rougher. And I say all that just because I feel like there is very much an adversarial tone when you go into all the Facebook groups. And I just would love for one day, if you could take that out of the conversation. I'm speaking more to the attendees. Just take that out of your conversation and look at it as a business to business transaction. Don't go into it with all of your preconceived annoyances. I mean, and I get it. I have them too sometimes. It's a different conversation once you talk to a provider relations and there isn't that kind of angst and kind of picking at them. Clint, when you talk to somebody on that end, they're kind of expecting you to throw spears at them all day, right?
They are. And it's not a personal, it's never personal. Creating an adversarial relationship, if you're dealing with provider relations or provider retention, an adversarial relationship doesn't get you anywhere, because the people that you're dealing with in the insurance company, they're just doing their job, and they don't make it personal, or very, very rarely do they make it personal. And they, as you said, Teresa, they just have a different set of rules. They have completely different goals in many cases, which is to minimize payouts. The office wants to maximize the payouts. In many ways, they're just a diametrical or opposing viewpoint on what they want to accomplish, but it can be done in a fairly civil manner most of the time.
Yeah, where I think the adversarial tone comes from is the meaning that they attach to the difficulty they have getting the patient or making treatment affordable for the patient. And I hear a phrase, and I may get in trouble for making this comment. I'm not a clinician. I've never been a clinician. I'll never be a clinician. So if I overstep my boundary, forgive me. It's not my intention to offend anyone. It's just an opinion that I've drawn over the years. I don't think that insurance plans dictate the quality of care that's provided in a practice. I realize that an insurance plan says, okay, you did, you provided one service and I'm going to reimburse you for another service. I'm not forcing you to provide this, or I'm not going to reimburse you at all if you don't do this, what I'm saying. I'm not forcing you to do anything you don't want to do. I'm just telling you, I'm going to pay you less unless you do it my way. And that's an agreement that we come to when we sign the paperwork with the insurance company. We say, okay, I've read all of this, which we probably didn't. And we said, okay, so I'm in agreement with all of these terms and conditions. And the agreement is that I'm going to get paid less for the services that I provide. And in exchange, you're going to send me new patients. So it's really just a business decision that we make. And I hear that comment often that, that dental insurance dictates the quality of care that we provide. And I have difficulty believing that. I don't necessarily subscribe to that ideology. And the other thing that I see, quite frankly, and Teresa, this may be right down your alley too, is I think over the years, we have more or less conditioned patients and taught patients how to respond to our treatment presentation in a way that makes dental insurance the priority.
Yes. 100%.
I think we've taught them how to do that. So like, for example, if I'm going to present adult fluoride and adult fluoride isn't covered by your insurance company, and I say, now, Teresa, your insurance isn't going to cover this. Do you want adult fluoride? If
right.
I have two things to talk about, one that's important and one that's lesser important, which one do I talk about first?
Well, yeah. You're going to say, how much? What do you mean? What am I going to pay? Yeah.
And so I basically just told the patient insurance comes first. And if you don't want it, just blame your insurance and conversation's over.
Right.
And I know that's an incredibly simplistic way to present that. I know it's more complex than that, but that's essentially what's happening.
Let me give you some more examples too. And this is something that our attendees can maybe just keep an ear out, say it in the morning meeting or whenever your next team meeting is, and make an agreement that you all listen to each other saying this. I guarantee you'll catch it, because even in the best offices I've worked with, we sometimes revert. Instead of saying the word maximum, don't say that. Say yearly benefit, because when you say maximum implies stopping point. Maximum means that's it. That's the end. We got to wait till next year. So you say yearly benefit, and that you say, I know you have $1,500 $500 of a yearly benefit. Let me see if I can get as much as I can for that. Other than that, it's going to be X amount, and we'll work that out. Let's talk about how we can, phrase that out, use care credit, whatever it is that you're going to use. And we do tend to say, yes, insurance, adult fluoride, your plan only covers it once a year. We don't want to do it a second time. So what do you think? I mean, that is how they phrase it. And of course, what are you going to say? And then it's how much is it? And do I really need it? And then what we do by leading with that, like you said, is saying that the insurance company must have limited it to one time a year for some reason. I wonder if they know something we don't know. And so I tend to instruct, just like if an office believes in sealants and does sealants, they'll say, this is what I really think is the ideal treatment for you. Some plans cover it, some plans don't. I can check and see if your plan is one of those plans. So I don't make it sound like your plan is paramount. And then if I have to say, you know what, your plan only covers it one time per year. I really do think that it's necessary twice per year for all of the reasons that I told you. Then that makes it seem like, well, what are these other plans that cover it 2 times a year? Why doesn't mine cover it 1 time per year? And you're not lying. There's plenty of plans that cover it 2 times per year. So it is a matter of how you phrase it. And I will tell you, I'm telling you, even the best doctors, we know many of them, they will sneak a look at what coverage the patient has before they bring them back for treatment, or they'll be aware of it. And I mean, this would happen to me. It would, of course, inform any conversations that I have. It wouldn't help but be in the back of my mind. So I'm not blaming doctors for that. It happens, right? So you're not going to pitch, a Lexus to somebody that, pulled up in a jalopy, that's burning diesel oil. You would know that, but that's not our thing. You either tell them what's the ideal treatment, what's the less than ideal treatment, what happens if there's no treatment. And if they choose no treatment, I don't take that personally. And I think a lot of people take it personally. They're like, oh no, you have to get it done. Oh, if it wasn't for insurance, you would get this done. Patients have the right to choose no treatment. We don't like it, but they have the right to do that. We have to respect that. So I think once I stopped being so involved and caring so much about everybody getting their work done, and I know that sounds horrible, but bear with me. If I stopped being so involved in it, then I started realizing some people just can't afford to get work done, no matter how affordable I make it for them. Some people don't have the time. Some people are too scared. I can't reach them in whatever place they're in. I can't take that personally. Once I stopped taking all of that so personally, the conversations really did shift. I have to say that they really big shift on my part.
Very nice. Very nice. I had a question I was going to ask right in there, but it's eluding me at the moment. So if it was important enough, I'm sure it will circle back.
This is what happens when I keep babbling. So you were asking about participation, though. You were talking about what are the best practices around getting out of plans.
Yes. And so one of the things I think a lot of practices should be considering right now, especially right now in the environment that we're in, for obvious reasons. You've got, capital gains. We're going to have unprecedented inflation. I mean, 40 cents of every dollar that's in circulation right now has been printed in the last 12 months. So inflation's right around the corner. If your costs go up, but you can't raise your fees, therein lies a pretty significant challenge, right? And then obviously with the talent population and the people that are available, and all those kinds of variables point to a deteriorating bottom line. And so one of the things I wanted to bring up was best practices for discontinuing participation. I've seen this done so many different ways. And I've actually got a couple of practices going through this at the moment. And so I've got some thoughts on it. But I know that there's more than one way to skin a cat. And I know that every practice is different. So what works really good in East Tennessee might not work at all in Colorado. So what are some of the strategies that you guys seen? I know that the typical send a letter and, when they come in, have the conversation with them, but is there anything unique that you've seen that really seems to influence a more positive outcome and reduce the amount of attrition of patients in that insurance plan?
Yeah. I would say, generally speaking, we discourage offices from sending a letter. Your contract says that you will notify the patient. It doesn't say you're going to notify the patient in writing. Occasionally it will. But over the years, the practices that have sent letters have almost always had a much higher attrition rate than we've seen. Because frankly, insurance is such a difficult subject. It's difficult for us, and we know 10, 20, 100 times more than a patient does. So it's just so difficult to convey to patients in a letter what's really happening. So the practices that are most successful that we see don't send a letter, and they instead have that knee-to-knee, eye-to-eye conversation. Dentistry at its core is still a relationship business, and relationships matter. Quality of care matters. And I think it's important to emphasize the positive there when you're talking with a patient. So if they come in and you've changed your insurance status, it's important that they understand they can still utilize benefits there. You'll still file the claim for them. You'll still fight for every dollar for them. They can still see the hygienist that they're used to seeing. They can still see the doctor. All of the positives of the practice are still there. And as long as they're a PPO patient, the defining benefit of a PPO plan is that it has out-of-network benefits. It's not like an HMO. So those patients will have benefits. And what a lot of our clients have done over the years is that they have made sure that that first visit, when the patient comes in, that patient's visit doesn't cost them any more than what the cost was prior to the change in insurance participation status. Okay, and so what we're trying to avoid there is a bait and switch type of situation where the patient comes in not knowing that the practice has changed their status and then pays more. That's going to really upset some patients. So we see that works better is to sit the patient down or have a quick conversation with them, say, we've changed our status. But I want to emphasize to you, it doesn't change any of your financial obligations today. If you're not used to paying out of pocket for your exam cleaning and x-rays today, you're not going to, right? And so let me tell you about what this change of status means. It means you can still come here. You can still, whoever will still file your insurance. And most patients are coming through hygiene, and that's typically a covered service whether you're in network or not. So in reality, what maybe a third of the patients have treatments that's actually being diagnosed. Most patients are coming in for a no-charge appointment anyway, and that's the opportunity to talk to them. So we see that mitigates attrition pretty nicely, whereas sending a letter historically is just, it's so difficult to write a good letter. Maybe you guys have more success, but our clients...
No.
I'm in total agreement with you. A letter's never going to be able to convey compassion and empathy and educate that patient in the same way that a trained professional in the office can. And so when you send a letter, it almost doesn't even give you a chance to defend yourself.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And you're already giving them a job, which is let's find another dentist, because in the first line, we're not going to be taking your insurance, and they just stop reading past that if they don't have a really serious relationship with you. And I love the dentists I work with, but sometimes those letters are like, this is why your insurance sucks. And it's a whole big long diatribe of, why it stinks, which means absolutely nothing to the patient. The patient is unaware of the ins and outs. And what really stinks is the patient's like, well, my plan sucks. Now what? Now you've just kind of deflated the patient, because now they're like, oh, wow, no one's going to want my plan now. This is going to be tough. So I'm not a fan of the letter at all. Now, the only time I think the letter could work is if you're incredibly short-staffed and you have to, because there's nothing else. There's no one that can sit there. You don't have the time or whatever. But I'd rather you dig deep, hire a company that does that. I don't do that, but hire a company that does that and can actually handle those conversations via phone calls, email newsletters, or at least a one-to-one, outreach to that patient. But the letter, if you have to, you have to, but don't make it adversarial. Again, let them know you're going to receive messages from your carrier that you can go other places and save a lot of money. What we really want is for you to stay with us. That's what should be in the letter, not all the reasons. That should be in the letter. And I think COVID, if there's one gift that COVID gave us, is the greatest excuse in the world. So COVID gave you the reason of, with the changes in PPE, with the staffing change, everybody knows what's going on with staffing and talent. So changes in PPE, with changes in staffing, we've had to make some changes. This was a very hard decision. We didn't take it lightly. We had to go out of network, but we want to, and big capital letters, we want to make this work for you. So if you're going to write a letter, it needs to be a very, very nice, this is all about the patient letter. It's not about you and what you want. It doesn't matter what you want, to be quite honest. So, but ideally, what Clint says is perfect. The knee-to-knee is the best thing. I have the offices start out 6 to 8 months prior to getting off of the plan, because you're going through the hygiene. Like you said, you're going to go through all the hygiene, everybody that's in. We set up a medical alert in the software so we know who's been talked to and who hasn't. We put a note in there so that we can track it. And then a year later, all those patients who had been talked to, we reach back out to them because they either have a new plan and they can come back, or they don't care and they hate the new patient, the new office they went to, and they want to come back and they don't realize they come back for some reason or another. So there's a reactivation campaign that goes on, but finding out what their out-of-network benefits, that is so key when they come back for that recare appointment. Clint, if you know what it's going to be ahead of time, you can tell them. If you don't know, like you said, then you make it right at that time, because we should have, could have, had that. And that's all part of customer service. And one thing too that I know has been very helpful is warning the patients that you're going to get notifications from your carrier that it's so much cheaper elsewhere. Let them know that ahead of time so that when they get it, they're like, oh, this is what they were talking about. Because if you don't let them know ahead of time, they're going to be like, oh, they didn't tell me this. Maybe it is cheaper on the other side. You're getting there first. You got to get there first. And then when they read it, they'll go, oh, all right, maybe I'll give these people a call. But, they told me this is going to happen. So if everything plays out just like you warn them, that you let them know it's going to be, look who looks like they know what they're doing, who knows what they're talking about, versus like when they call a new office to make an appointment, they're like, do you take my insurance? I don't know. What insurance do you have? I mean, you know how customer service is. Mm-hmm. So we want to shine at all of those steps along the ways, but it's good record keeping, it's good tracking, and it's good getting permission to circle back. I know if they ask for their records, I know you're leaving. What I'd really like to do is, could I contact you in 6 months just to see how it's going? If they say no, whatever, it's fine. Yeah. They have the right. But if they go, yeah, that's fine, maybe I won't like them. You'll hear those conversations. You've already gotten permission. You're extending that relationship. And you know what? Keep reaching out to them. I don't want to inactivate. When I leave a PPO, I don't inactivate that patient for a long time. Usually I inactivate if they haven't been in a while, but that patient gets a special little report that they get on classification that they're on, because that person will come back to you because they left, not really because they wanted to. They thought they had to leave a lot of times. So lots of moving pieces, lots of customer service opportunities when you leave a PPO.
Yeah. And I don't think you can accurately measure attrition due to discontinuing participation for at least 12 months.
Yes, because exactly.
Some of those patients are going to leave initially, and then they go to another practice and say, well, the grass isn't greener on the other side. And they turn around and come right back.
Yeah. Usually two hygiene cycles, because like you said, they may go for the first one. They go, it wasn't that great, but I didn't have any out of pocket. Then they go back and then maybe they actually need something. And then, oh, this hygienist was even worse. So usually about 2 cycles for them to come back, or even shorter. The ones who are going to come back and you really impress, they won't leave. Actually, if you really impress them, they won't leave. I think people know how bad it is in other medical offices and dental offices. So yeah.
Yeah. Do you recommend if let's say, for example, I'm going out of network effective January 1, 2022, I'm going to be out of network with the insurance plan. And I haven't seen you before then. So like your first visit back into the practice is after we are no longer in network. Do you recommend honoring the in-network fees for their first appointment back? Or do you make an adjustment there? What do you
Did they have a chance to schedule before? If they couldn't get in before the end of the year, I would say, if it's our fault because we were so slammed, maybe I would split the difference. I'm not a fan of giving money away. It is what it is. I like charging my full fee. I'm a big fan of that. Yeah.
But so if we left 12 messages and they haven't called us back, and now
no. And if they're intending to stay, I mean, I think every situation is different, but I would lean towards, if I gave it a shot and they messed around, didn't come in, you snooze, you lose. Sounds harsh, but that's kind of it's a life rule, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I would probably lean towards the softer side a bit and let them come in and explain it to them. And in my opinion, I would say, you still have great benefits, and we're going to utilize those benefits today. And you're not going to pay anymore. Yes, you're giving up some dollars on that appointment, but we all know the lifetime value of a client is thousands and thousands of dollars. So if we have to give up something on that first visit, if we're basically honoring the same PPO fees that we've had for years, that may be a small enough cost that in the grand scheme of things, keeping that patient, it's well worth it. So there's an argument to be made for both sides.
I agree.
But a lot of those patients, you can look them in the eye and say, look, we're going to maximize your benefits. And the good news, Teresa, or the good news, Jon, is we've done such a good job of taking care of your mouth. And you've been so diligent about being in here every 6 months. This change is not even going to impact you because you're just here for cleaning. And as long as you're regular with your hygiene, we may not need to do anything other than this for years. So there's a lot of ways that you can make the patient right here and make it soft enough that they don't feel like they're a bad person for having an insurance that you dropped, or that they don't feel like their insurance is crappy. Because Teresa's correct, entirely correct in my opinion. You can't make it about how crappy their insurance is because they didn't choose it. It's just something that's typically given to them by their employer. So I think it's better to not tell them how horrible their insurance is, because that's a dead end street that nobody wants to hear.
Yeah. So in conclusion there, yeah, I'm in total agreement. I think there's an argument for both sides. I do think you need to take a firmer stance for the most part. But like Clint said, that gives you kind of some tools in your toolkit. So in the event that you've got maybe an abrasive patient and you risk, a bad review or something like that on Facebook, it gives you some leverage to kind of reel them back in and help to maintain the relationship. However, I do think that we've got to give the administrative team some parameters.
Yes.
Because if you don't give them parameters, then it's kind of like as soon as it gets uncomfortable, oh, well, we'll just write off the balance.
Just one time. And that's it. But you have to give those front desk people either training or you have to give them protection. Because let's face it, doctors, y'all run back to the operatory. You let the front desk person deal with it. And unless they're given some tools or some protection, they're going to be the brunt, or they're going to be on the brunt of an upset patient. So that's why, particularly me on my end, I would say let's make this as soft as possible and do all we can to retain the patient. But a lot of it is going to come down to what the two of you have referenced before, which is having good systems in place, talking to patients well in advance. And that's where you guys really shine, Jon, is having those systems in place and making sure the patient has a really high degree of trust in the quality of care and that's being offered both clinically as well as the quality of their experience overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think one thing I also want to just point out real quick is I think it's imperative, just like you said, Clint, I think it's imperative that the doctor and the clinical team fully support the administrative team when we're going through either a fee increase or dropping an insurance plan, because they are going to get the brunt of that negative feedback. They won't say anything to the hygienist, and then they'll complain, to the administrative personnel. So we really need to support them in that and understand it is difficult. They are catching the brunt end of it. Mm-hmm. So if we can somehow open the lines of communication up during the appointment before it gets to that point, we might mitigate a lot of the upset before it ever gets to that point to begin with.
Absolutely.
So
that's part of
it's a team-oriented approach, and I think it needs to be communicated from the team, not just one person.
Well, and I think the owner doctor has to really take a good look in the mirror too and see if their team's ready for it. Because if you have a team member, say you have a solo team member, maybe two up front, if they're not on board with any changes to PPO status, I mean, I've seen this be torpedoed tremendously. I've seen them, I've overheard, when you have the recorded phone calls, sometimes you'll listen back to see where did we go wrong on this? And you'll hear them say, yeah, he's out of network now, so it's going to cost you double. I mean, you will hear those conversations. So if your admin team is not on board and has not been trained, is very against it, I think you need to take a step back first before you do anything, because your patients will have those conversations that you will find out about it years later, months later. And that really can torpedo any office getting off of any plans, even signing up for plans. Clint, you'll hear team members say, yeah, I don't know why we signed up with all these plans. You'll hear all sorts of things that are coming out of the admin team. So always make sure that you get a good temperature of the office before you start anything. And really the good look in the mirror is your customer service ready for this? If you're not used to providing stellar customer service, making allowances like you all were saying, for being able to give some courtesies, in these cases, if there's not permission there and there's not training on how to really give that white glove service, then that's an even harder hill for you to climb. So there has to be some real reality that is discussed before you make this. It sounds great to get off plans and then, everything's going to be great. But if your team isn't ready for it and is not customer service oriented, you might be the only one in there saying all the right things, and that's not cool.
Yeah. And to that point, I think I would dig deep in finding out and uncovering what the belief system around insurance participation in your team is. Mm-hmm. If your team has a very strong belief system around why we need to be in network with this insurance plan, and then you drop that insurance plan, the retaliation isn't just going to be from the patients.
Yes, absolutely.
And the same thing is true if you go into network with an insurance plan. And I've seen this happen so many different ways. For example, you've got hygienists on a percentage of production, which, just full disclosure, I do not recommend that. But you've got hygienists on a percentage of production, and then you go in network with an insurance plan and their production drops, right? So some of those variables you got to be really aware of, but you really need to invest in the belief systems of your team, invest in their belief in themselves and the value that they deliver, and help them to better understand that we don't have to discount our services. There are plenty of people out there that want, what we have to offer and what we are very passionate about doing. It's just you're not promoting that. That's not the environment that you created. So there is going to be a little bit of turmoil as you transition from one business model to the next. That's to be expected. You are going to have some attrition. That's perfectly okay. I can give you example after example of practices that we have helped to navigate away from insurance participation. Their active patient base is cut in half compared to what it used to be. But the value of a patient in that practice is 3, 4, 5 times what it was when they were in network with every insurance plan. And their production is 2 or 3 times higher than what it was then. So it's a conversation about working smarter, not harder at the end of the day.
I have a question for you, sure, Jon, and maybe you guys, both of you, could give me some insight on how you measure this. One of the metrics that I throw out, and I only do strategy calls. I don't do the full consulting that you all do. I just do strategy calls. One thing I have them run is the referral report. And of their top 10 referrers, I like to say that at least half of those top 10 are non-insurance referrers. Because if you have patients referring to you, you're doing something right. You're generating some goodwill. Yeah. But what unfortunately happens is they run that report and the top 10 is all insurance companies or, old patients that they haven't had a referral from them for years. And it's all weighted the top 5 insurance companies. Yeah. So do you have a similar metric that you recommend or similar report that you recommend to have them take a look at?
I do like that report. Some practices I have keep track of that manually. Some practices do a good job at putting that information into EagleSoft, and so we can find out where their new patients are coming from. Personally, the target that I recommend that we shoot for in terms of where our new patients come from, we want 60% of our new patients coming by way of referral from existing patients.
Beautiful.
If you're not hitting that mark, you need to really be working on your internal marketing. Yep. Okay. And probably and I'm just going to be blunt. I hope I don't offend anybody when I say this, but quite frankly, people just don't like asking patients to refer. And I'm like, you got to get over that. I understand. It was uncomfortable for me at one point in time to ask my clients to refer, but when I started asking my clients to refer, to my amazement, they know a lot of people and they are more than willing to refer. And my business just grew.
We can go over that. I am the queen of asking patients to send more people. I love it. I used to just drag it out of them. Mm-hmm. It was so much fun because our office was fun and we made it fun. So I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, I saw Clint was ready to answer. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not. It's, part of that though is a level of confidence, right? Mm-hmm. It's hard to ask for referrals and when we're not confident in what we're doing. So as your team is trained and as you deliver better quality care and a higher level of service, you become more comfortable asking for referrals and earning the right to do so.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
When you have a better product within your four walls. And so, what you both do in terms of helping the team get trained and putting in those systems, that is so key to ultimately reducing the insurance participation. Mm-hmm. The best clients for us are those practices where the team is very well trained and the team believes in the value of what is being done in the practice. Mm-hmm. And they don't believe that value is always reflected in PPO participation. And so we love clients who are working with a consulting firm and are getting good training and they're developing that belief system that you referred to, John, because that's ultimately the front desk will either be responsible for helping this ship float or it will sink it, as Teresa mentioned, if the front desk is not involved. So I'm a big fan of referrals. And frankly, it is when practices say to us, we want to add more PPOs so that we can increase the number of patients, I try and explain to them that there's a lot of better ways to add new patients than relying on insurance. Not only is it extremely expensive, but it's much less effective than it used to be. Mm-hmm. Now, when the size of PPO networks is so large, now a doctor who joins, they're on the list, but they may be only one of 50 doctors in that geographic area on the list. So your odds are not that great of getting a bunch of new patients by signing up with PPOs. You're better off developing these systems or even paying external marketing dollars, reactivate the patients, whatever it might be. But PPOs are, in my estimation, probably the least desirable marketing avenue that a practice can undertake, because with marketing, I can pay $5,000 and get some flyers and attract a certain number of patients. With PPOs, I'm paying that cost every single visit for years. And it's just so astronomically expensive.
Yeah. The recommended target is 60% of referrals 60% of new patients coming by way of referral, which means the other 40% are coming from your marketing, external marketing, and insurance participation. Okay. One of the reasons for that is because internal marketing is so much more cost effective than external marketing. External marketing is extremely expensive. Insurance participation is the most expensive external marketing you can possibly do.
Yep.
So anytime I've got a doctor that comes to me and says, we just need more new patients, the first things I'm going to look at are treatment acceptance and what we call recare effectiveness. Because if the national averages in those areas are about 30 to 40%, if you're only scheduling a third of the treatment that you present, there's a ton of treatment sitting there that you've just got to get better at enrolling. If you've only got 30% of your active patient base consistently coming through recare, don't go and network with Blue Cross. Put a very proactive hygiene reactivation mechanism in place and get some more. That's the single fastest way to grow a dental practice. So there's and keep in mind, you've invested. If you've got 1,800 patients, that's goodwill. You've invested in those people. Get the most out of that investment you possibly can. I see a lot of times when I'll go in and do practice evaluations, I'll see $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month marketing budgets, and their retention and recare is like 20, 25%. And I'm like, golly, man, I mean, I paid for myself 3 or 4 times, and all I'm going to do is tell you to stop doing that and start doing this. You know,
close the back door.
Yeah, but that's another example of the little inefficiencies. There's so many of those things where practices just leak money, that they could just, do things slightly different and, quite frankly, easier, and be more productive, more profitable. And that's one of the reasons why we, definitely recommend a profit share compensation incentive program, because the team is going to be doing a lot of this work. They are going to be getting the feedback from the patients that might be a little uncomfortable. And so we want to make sure that they are being incentivized to support the practice at that level and carry us to the next level.
It's so huge. I see so many offices that don't have something like that in place. And when it's really obvious when you do have profit sharing in place, I mean, you can really see the ownership. And I don't actually talk about that very much at all. And I probably should circle back to that, because it really does make a difference. I've noticed in the offices I've had experience with that do that. That's a great point.
Yeah. And you honestly, I think you'd be surprised at how much we get kind of thrown into that umbrella of consultant pretty often. And not that it's a bad word. I don't mind the word. I do like the term coach more so, because, quite frankly, I would say 80% of what we do with our offices is working on self-confidence and their belief systems around the value that they offer, around communication and leadership, much more so than it is like what systems to put in place. That stuff's easy. But like, if you don't have a belief system that you can chart that your fees should be in the 80th percentile, and you're a fee for service practice, and your thought process is I have to compete with these insurance practices, man, you are so missing the boat on that one. You're taking the financial burden of insurance participation without the benefit of new patients from the insurance company. And I see that all the time. So that's a belief system challenge, and those are rampant. Whether we can have a very proactive perio program, or a risk-based fluoride program, or we can have our fees in a certain area. All of that stems from the belief systems that the team has. So we spend a tremendous amount of time. And I would say at least once every other time that I interact with my teams, we come to one of those types of conversations where we're looking at the belief system behind the decision that's being made and doing some work on that. So it's kind of like, rather than address the symptoms, like if I were to ask you, is tooth decay, tooth loss, oral cancer, and gum disease, are those problems?
Of course.
I would say they're not problems. I would say they're symptoms.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
The problem is the patient.
Look, I failed. Yeah.
That was a trick question. The problem is the patient doesn't prioritize their oral health. So we can address cancellations and no-shows, okay? But the problem is the underlying belief system that is resulting in that outcome. So let's go to the source, fix that. And now you not only fix that problem, you fix a whole host of other symptoms that are tied to that one.
Clint, you've said something about, or I'm sorry, Jon had said something about having the benefits of not having the benefits of participation, but giving the farm away. Clint, how many times have you had somebody call? I mean, this just happened to me. Somebody wanted to join a plan. And when you did the numbers, you're like, if you join this plan, all of your patients are already they already have this insurance. If you join this plan, you're going to be dropping all this money. Why would you do that? How often does that happen?
It happens an overwhelming majority of the time. We call it internally, we call that the cannibalization factor. How much are we going to cannibalize existing revenues by signing up for this plan? And there's some really good softwares out there. And some of these softwares allow us to really look deeply and say, okay, if we're going to join XYZ insurance company, how many pro fees did we do? How many 3-surface composites? How many crowns? And then we compare the fees that are generated with what those PPO fees are going to be. And we can quantify it. We can say it's going to cost you $57,000 to join this plan. And for that type of a reduction in your current practice profitability, how confident are you that you can attract at least $57,000 more from new patients, because frankly, my level of confidence in that is very minimal. And unless you're telling me you have massive patient attrition issues that you're looking for PPO participation to solve those, we try and talk practices out of joining PPOs a lot. And whether it's joining a PPO or, well, let's just take the example of joining a PPO. Joining a PPO should be about the last resort. You should work with a coach. You should market. You should look at reactivation. You should optimize your systems. You should do all of these other things. All of those are much more effective, efficient, and profitable than reducing your fees just to participate with PPOs and hoping that works. We frankly try and talk practices out of PPOs a lot. Even though my business is profitable PPOs, the key word there is profitable and not all PPOs. So if we're going to do it, let's participate in those that are good. And there's a lot of due diligence that should be done before signing up for a plan. If you're an established practice, good grief, look at every other opportunity and exhaust everything else that you possibly can before you sign up for a PPO. It's going to cost you 40% of your existing revenues on that patient base. Sorry, I get super evangelical about it because I get frustrated with how these doctors give up huge amounts of money in their practice. And it almost makes me emotional because there's ways around it.
Yeah. That's actually really good. That's a fantastic segue into the next question, which is, when is the appropriate time to bring on or drop an insurance plan?
So
go ahead. This is one.
I'll give you a whole bunch of examples. I was just at the ADOM meeting, the American Association of Dental Office Management, and I'm hearing from offices that we're booked into April for recare. We're booked into February for restorative. We don't have any space. We can't expand. We need an associate. We probably could support 3 more associates, and they want to how long should we plan on getting them credentialed? Wait a second. You just told me you have patients coming out of your ears. You have space maybe to add a really good associate. Why are you trying to credential and add in any more plans? Like, take a look at your capacity, take a look at your the patient flow, take a look again in the mirror. What is your capability? That's one thing. We look at capacity, but we don't look at capability. If you don't have enough hygienists, if you don't have enough admin or any teams, you got to be careful of that. But why are you looking to do things differently if you know that you're booked out like crazy? The one thing to say is look at your worst plans and get out. Now is the time to get out. And doctors, if this is the time where you're thinking, okay, maybe I can slow down a little bit, you can. This is the perfect time to do that. So it's hard to give you, well, there are rules, of course, but every situation I hear nowadays, since the lockdown has happened, most of the time, 95% of the time, I look at them going, haven't you always wanted to get out of plans? Didn't you tell me last year you wanted to get out of plans? Oh, is this that time? Yes, let's do it. Let's do it. So I think the capacity, patient flow, and honestly, your mood. If you cannot be in network anymore because it's killing you, you have to take a look at your stomach lining too. If it's really killing you to be in network, then I'm telling you, it will be better when you're out of network, just because that
not too much.
There you go. There you go.
Folks, that's the perfect answer. You just completely took that one off the table. That's a perfect answer. I'm 100% agreement. I see that one a lot. Practices that have capacity issues they can't get. And we're very, very strategic about like recare capacity. So like if you can't get a recare patient, we monitor something called hygiene openings. And so when you can't, the interesting thing is we monitor how many available opportunities are in your recare program over the next 6 to 8 weeks. As that number goes down, your attrition starts to go up.
Yes.
Like your cancellations and no-shows start to go up.
Yes.
Right. And it's because we don't have as much flexibility to accommodate patient convenience. So you look at the practices that grow the fastest. Is it a startup or an established practice? It's a startup.
They have room.
They have capacity.
Yeah, unlimited capacity, unlimited flexibility. And so what happens with established practices is they start to encounter like an opportunity cost.
Yes.
Which is their recare system starts to become so full that they can't accommodate new patients in a reasonable amount of time. They can't accommodate recare patients in a reasonable amount of time, and their cancellations and no-shows go up. When the doctor sees that, he says, oh, well, I don't need a hygienist because we have all these cancellations and no-shows, right? And the solution is actually the problem.
Right.
And it's a little bit more intuitive. So that is a fantastic time to control demand, right? Like if you've only got 4 operatories and you're doing $2 million out of 4 operatories, right? You're well over the industry standard of what should be produced out of an operatory. Okay. You're blowing the doors off that facility. You need to do one of 2 things, either find another facility or control demand. But I would argue that you haven't maxed out that piece of real estate until you're blowing the doors off of all 4 operatories as a fee-for-service practice.
Yes.
With capacity to grow within those walls.
The new patient piece is really interesting too, because a lot of times they don't have enough room for the new patient visit too. So no recare room, no room for the new patient visit. And then, yes, you're booked out until April, but then March or April comes around, you're going, where is everybody? Well, it's because you didn't have room for them. And if I'm going to sit with a patient and go over their treatment plan with them, you've talked to them about scaling route planning, and I'm going to reinforce that by talking about the bacterial load and all of this, but I can't see you for 8 weeks, then that bacterial load suddenly didn't become as important as it sounded, because obviously we could wait 8 weeks to see you. So it really just undercuts everything that you're saying, the urgency and just defeating the whole dental message if you're trying to get them in for more work that they need. Yeah, it's a bad cycle to be in, really bad cycle to be in.
And in contrast, is there an appropriate time to go in network? And so I would say as a startup, great opportunity, right? Unless you're just good with growing slow, which nothing's wrong with that. If you want to grow faster, then typically what we would do is we would establish a certain, active patient point based on your annual patient value and new patient conversion. And then once we hit that point, then we can start to come out of insurance plans, because we've hit essentially a point at which all of our bills are covered. The doctor's able to pay himself what he's able to pay himself in order to make sure the wife is happy. And now we can start to risk anything over that and slow growth down and do it a little bit more efficiently. There are other times, and just exactly what Clint said, these are very, very specific circumstances. So let's say that you've got a doctor that just built a new facility with 15 operatories. He's only in network with Delta Premier. Okay. He's only in network with Delta Premier. He's got a brand new facility. He's in a pretty big position of liability, because that practice's ability to pay its bills is solely dependent on him turning a handpiece. Okay. So if anything happens to him, where's the practice? And then B, last time I checked, Delta Premier is not so gung-ho on credentialing new providers. So in the event that he wanted to sell his practice and I wanted to buy it, I'm out of network with 100% of those patients on day one. So that's a huge risk that I'm taking, which I'm going to try to negotiate in the purchase price or in some financial arrangement after the fact. So that is an example of, does it make sense? Right? Will it cannibalize some of your revenue? Potentially, but you want, just like Clint said, is you want to go in and do the math and say, which plans are you considering going to network with? How many patients do you have in those plans, and how much will it cost you to take the adjustment on that plan? And if you can justify and offset the expense of going in network, then to me, the benefit of having an associate that covers my liability and provides me a passive stream of income starts to get a little bit more attractive. Plus, I've got 15 operatories now when I was only working out of 6, and I'm wanting to bring on multiple providers and specialists and build, let's say, a group practice. I need patience, right? And so in that case, that would make a lot of sense. But again, you have to be very strategic about that, and you've got to know, which is what a lot of practices don't really know, what a relationship with an insurance plan is actually costing them.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you asked them, how much are you writing off on this insurance plan? Most don't really know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You need to know that number. You need to know I'm writing off this much. I'm writing off this much.
That's one of the most enjoyable things that I'm a numbers geek, right? And that's one of the most enjoyable things to do for a practice is to really dive deeply into that and say how much are we losing here with this plan? If we were to add another plan, how much would we lose? But one of the missing pieces, or one of the things doctors are not aware of, is when you start considering joining a plan, be aware that a lot of these plans have affiliate carrier clauses, meaning if you sign an agreement with an insurance company, that may rope you into 2 or 3 other plans. I'll use the example of Emeritus. If you're going to sign an agreement with Emeritus, you're also agreeing to participate with Aetna and Principal and United Concordia and Guardian and Standard and Reliance. So one agreement, and that's just one example. If you're considering signing up for a PPO, you better be really clear, and you need to ask them to disclose who else do they have relationships with. Because one plan that you join may not seem like it's going to be that big of a deal, but if it ropes you into 5 or 6 other plans, let's say it ropes you into MetLife, and you had 200 active patients and you didn't know you were going to get MetLife, that financially is just a very, very painful thing to encounter. So I would encourage anybody, if they're in that situation where they're doing a startup, or as you said, John, they've got this 15-op practice and they're bringing in an associate, they want to have some PPOs, fine, that's a justifiable strategy, but be really careful of what plans are linked, and also be really careful that some of these plans require that not just the associate is going to participate, that the owner doctor has to participate in some situations as well. I mean, a Diversified will do that. A Dynamax will do that. A Delta will do that. The Ds, Delta, Dynamax, Diversified, will rope the senior doctor in depending upon your state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's keep this in mind just as a criteria for decision making. This is something that I tell all of my teams. Every decision, it's okay to make a decision that's a wrong decision. You can always fix it, right? If you go in network with a plan, say, oh, that does not work, get out of network.
Get out.
Right? But don't be afraid to make the decision. Don't be afraid to pull the trigger on a decision. Make a decision. And this is true for the personnel, for the team, for the employees in the practice. You've got to have the autonomy and the freedom to make a decision and make a mistake. Okay. The only mistake that you could possibly make is the mistake that you don't learn something from. And what's even better than that is learning from someone else's mistake. Right. So, but one thing that I would tell you is if you just adhere to these 3 criteria, all decisions must be in the best interest of the practice, of the team, and of the patients simultaneously. It can't meet the interest of one of those and sacrifice the interest of the other 2. And I said team, not doctor. Doctor's part of the team, but we can't make a decision that's only in the interest. And this is just good leadership, quite frankly. I can't make a decision in my business that only serves my interest because I have people that depend on me. I've got employees and I've got, contractors and coaches. So I have to take everybody into consideration, right? And the same thing is true for the owner doctors. So the practice, the team, and the patients. Let's see here.
Well, there's one scenario too I'd like to get Clint's input in is when there's a doctor who's looking towards the end of the times and they're looking to transition out, and then they all of a sudden realize maybe their office isn't worth what it could have been. And now they're in overdrive trying to raise the value of the practice. They're trying to get hygiene going and scrambling. They found an associate who's ready to rock and roll. And so they then think, after running a pretty, I would say, normal, nice, run-of-the-mill, not high energy, just a nice practice that he has enjoyed or she's enjoyed for his life, but now it needs to be profitable enough to sell. That's when they start to think that participation makes a difference and they can start really getting the patients in. Is that a good strategy? Are there drawbacks to that? Is there a strategy that what do you say to a doctor that's in that situation, Clint?
Well, we don't value practices like I think John does. But in talking with people who do value practices, typically you're looking at a 3-year weighted average or some a practice is not just valued on the most recent years. So if you're going to bring in PPOs and you think it's going to grow the practice, you really need to be looking at it as something over several years. And frankly, I would try and discourage most doctors from doing it, because if they've built that largely fee-for-service practice or minimal insurance participation, that's their baby. And I would feel bad saying to somebody, hey, for the last couple of years of this 25-year career, now you got to get in insurance and you got to deal with all this crap. Mm-hmm. I would try and talk doctors out. Now I'm an emotional person, but I would say, let's not do that. Even though we can help you do it to put the insurances in, I would tell them they need to work with a coach to look at reactivation, to look at retention, to look at increasing their case acceptance, to do larger cases, to do anything other than PPOs, with the exception of if they're going to do an associate. If they're going to bring in that associate, okay, I'm on board with that, but maybe it's just because of the personal relationships that I've had in dentistry over the years. I don't want somebody's last couple of years in dentistry to be stuck with PPOs and what we call heart sink patients, meaning if you look at the schedule and your heart sinks because you know that you're not going to get paid very much for working on that patient, that's a crappy way for your last couple of years in dentistry.
Yeah, for sure.
And so you can tell I get about it, but there's so many other things to do, in my opinion, unless it's going to be that associate. Then do it for the associate, fine.
Yeah, I think with the lockdown. Oh, sorry, John.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. I was just going to say I'm in total agreement with your assessment there. I would certainly, before I went in network, because when you're doing a practice, the most common valuation methodology used in dentistry is an income approach, right? There are times when an asset approach makes more sense, and that would be like a startup who has $1 million worth of equipment, it's only producing $15,000 a month. Right. There's a lot more inherent value there than just the income that's being. Matter of fact, there is no income. He hasn't even broken even yet. Right. So I can't use the income methodology there. But in established practice, income methodology, we're typically looking at a multiple of EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, which is the cash flow of the business. So insurance participation does the exact opposite of cash flow. Right. So if you go into network because you're preparing your practice for sale, as a buyer, although I am interested in how many patients you have, that's not my primary consideration. My primary consideration is how much cash is that asset spinning off? Does it cover the liability at the bank when I take out this $1.5 million loan to buy the practice? And does it pay me more after I've done the dentistry and paid the bills than what I'm currently making as an associate? That's what's going on in my head. Right. So
I think that we could say from my perspective, the PPO participation is a slow strategy. It is a slow growth strategy. It is a quick reduction in profitability strategy. Mm-hmm. Now, the flip side to that is training with professionals like the two of you. That's a very quick, some good training can dramatically add to the bottom line within 2 weeks or a month. If you're going to rely on, if you want to grow your practice, frankly, don't come to us to add PPOs. That's a slow thing. Pay for a coach to help you get better systems in place and do all of that. I would discourage any doctor from signing up for PPOs late in their career. And I would encourage them to spend money on coaches who can make a quick difference to the bottom line, because it ain't PPOs, to tell you the truth.
It's just unfortunate we've gotten with the lockdown and the staffing shortages and just the general frustration. You have a lot of doctors who, truthfully, for another 10 years probably wouldn't have had these thoughts, but now are entertaining these thoughts. And so with that comes the lack of preparation. You would have had 10 more years to kind of do your due diligence and look into it. Now all of a sudden people are going, how quickly can I get out? How quickly can I sell? And so there can be some missteps along the way. Yeah, no, thanks for elaborating on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think in conclusion to that, the answer is it's not that simple. There's a lot of variables that need to be taken in consideration before you go in network or come out of network with an insurance plan. You need to make sure that you talk to someone who is familiar with those variables and can provide you the appropriate guidance so that you do so effectively. Because I hate to say this, but it's true. There's a lot of bad advice out there. And quite frankly, what most dentists do is they go talk to their buddy down the road, and whatever he did, that's what I do. Well, what if he did it wrong? So just don't be afraid. The only investment that I can't remember where I got this from, but the only investment that you can make that's guaranteed to give you a positive return 100% of the time is in yourself. So don't ever hesitate to make an investment in your education, in your coaching, regardless of who it is. Right? This isn't a plug for me, whoever. There's a lot of great coaches out there, a lot of great people out there that understand the business industry, the dental industry, and can provide fantastic guidance. Just don't be afraid to make that investment in yourself and your team, because opportunity cost is the biggest cost there is, because there's no way to measure how much it actually would have been. Okay, so that's the most expensive cost there is, and making the wrong decisions increase that cost. And it costs you a lot of time. So there is a more efficient path, a more effective way. And the answer is learning from other people's mistakes through your advisor, rather than making your own mistakes and learning from those.
Absolutely.
So so again, just make sure that you've got a board of advisors. You've got people who can point you in the right direction and make the best possible decisions. Let's see here. We can probably get through this one pretty quick, because we were kind of discussing this when we first started, and that was how to limit the impact or mitigate the impact of insurance participation. And so I'm probably going to leave this one up to you two, because this is your space, Teresa, on maximizing the reimbursement from the patient, and then Clint on maximizing the reimbursement from the insurance company. Mechanically, from a system standpoint, really the only thing that you can do is, and I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know already, which is don't only talk to the patient about what insurance covers. Like, have a defined standard of care that you believe in and promote that. And if insurance pays for some of it, great. If insurance doesn't, that's okay too. But promote that standard of care, not just limiting yourself to what insurance covers. Outside of that conversation, strategically with your schedule, like for example, if 50% of my patient base is Delta and I see an average of 20 patients a day, then statistically 10 of those patients are going to be Delta patients. And let's say my Delta reimbursement or my Delta adjustment is 40%, and I want to cut that in half. Right? I want to cut it down to 20. That means I've got to cut the number of Delta patients that I see in half. So if I'm seeing on average 10 Delta patients per day, then what I'm going to do is go into my schedule and put blocks in the hygiene schedule. We call those reverse blocks, just like a crown block or a new patient block or an SRP block. I'm going to put that block in my hygiene schedule, and that block is designated only for Delta patients. Those are the only options they get. Okay. And if I wind up putting a Blue Cross patient in that block, that's okay. That means now there's only 4 blocks for Delta today, right? But essentially what we're doing is we're controlling the volume of Delta patients on our schedule on any given day, and therefore mitigating the impact that the adjustment that Delta has is going to have financially on the practice. So outside of that, the rest of this is going to fall in your court.
Well, when it comes to getting your claims paid, that's really the best way to maximize your participation, is for every dollar you bill for, that you're able to get it. So from where I come from, my expertise is making sure that all of your claims get paid. So if you are making sure that your documentation is good and that your claims are clean going in, and that you know you're coding really well, then of course you're going to have a better chance of getting your claims paid. The silent leak that a lot of offices, owners, doctors don't really see is the write-offs and the insurance claims aging. So if you're not monitoring those reports, you could be losing a lot of money by not having that follow-up. One thing that surprises a lot of doctors, if they've never looked at it, is that there's something called a timely filing deadline. And if you haven't filed your claims within, usually it's a year, but a lot of them have gone down to 90 days, 6 months even. And if you have a lot of secondary insurance, it takes time for the first one to get paid, then you send in the second one. If you're not on top of that, you could easily go outside of your timely filing deadline. There's also not appealing the denials that come in. There's also adjusting off rather than going after an appeal or actually billing the patient. If you have a culture, somebody in the office who's afraid to bill the patient, they are not good with collecting, they're afraid of the conflict, many times you will see it being written off rather than collecting. So my focus is every dollar that you bill, collecting and being able to collect every dollar that you bill. And the best way to do that is making sure that you're sending in documentation accurately and then making sure your estimates are accurate. And that really comes from confidence. So I want to collect what I think is going to be the patient's co-insurance at the moment. I want to try to collect that either before the appointment or at the time of the appointment. If I'm not comfortable, if I'm not confident, if I kind of go, well, I was really off last time, maybe I'll just ask for half of them. That's how you get into that habit of not collecting or just collecting a little bit. And then you don't catch it on the back end. So always making sure that I get a good estimate to the patient, collecting at the time of service, following up on my claims to make sure that they're paid. A lot of times the doctors, I have to do a little bit of a come to Jesus meeting with them because sometimes the documentation isn't up to par. And my motto in my classes is documentation is going to drive your revenue. I cannot get your claims paid if your documentation is terrible. And I need you to work on that. Clint will probably tell you by looking at the contracts that are out there now that most of the insurance carriers, most Deltas, and I think the other ones are going to follow this year from what I've read, is that they're not taking narratives anymore. They don't want narratives. They don't want the narratives that I write up front or any of your other insurance coordinators. They want a snapshot, a screenshot of your clinical notes. So if your clinical notes are poo-poo, for lack of a better word, your claims are not going to get paid and you're going to end up having to fight them over and over again. So my tip to all of my classes the last 2 years has been, let's get your doctors on board with templates and getting good, clean claims out there. So my area of expertise is getting that done. So if you could follow that part, just the documentation piece is going to make a huge difference. And then run the reports and make sure that it's not leaking out the back end, the money that you may not be seeing that's being written off or discounted. One of the spreadsheets I'm sure that Clint will give you is the difference between the fee schedule and your full fees. I also have recommended adjustment types that I have the clients make. So Delta, MetLife, Cigna, anyone that you participate with has its own adjustment type. That's not the difference between the fee schedules. These are all the additional write-offs that you have to make because you couldn't get a claim paid, or you fought for a non-covered service and you couldn't get it paid, or you couldn't get it allocated so that you could charge for it. Those are the adjustments above and beyond the fee schedule. So when he runs his report and I run that report, the number is bigger than you can imagine. So you have to really track all of that. Good tracking, good reports, good, clean documentation. I mean, that really just makes me very happy. It makes me all tingly when I see good documentation.
Would you say it's very, very a best practice would be to, what's the word I'm looking for? Overdo it on the diagnostic side.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Camera photo plus photography plus
absolutely
as much diagnostic support as you could possibly provide.
It's really hard to argue when you have all of that documented in either the comprehensive evaluation or the part of the evaluation before you get started with the procedure. For example, you have these new AAP guidelines for all of your perio services. It's very hard for an insurance carrier to argue that you've staged the patient and now you're getting ready to grade the patient. You have all the diagnostics that match that staging. And if you're unsure what I'm talking about, then this is something you're going to need to bone up on. This is all the new AAP guidelines. It's really hard to argue with that when I have it in your clinical notes. I get this paid all day, every day. And the other part too is the conversations that the patients have. If a patient says, this has been hurting for a long time, or I've had this crown for over 12 years. We don't do a lot of documentation as far as what the patient says. We need to add that in there. I guess here's my best practices for documentation is I take a look at the provider processing manuals. Those are like the 200-page documents that have all of the procedure codes and what they will reimburse on. So I look at the templates and I make sure that could this help you with your templates? And then I take a look at your malpractice carrier. I ask for a copy of their recommended templates. And then somewhere in between is the template of your office. And so it does take some work putting that together. Good templates make a huge difference. And yeah, so there's your there's your homework.
Well, and I might say from the fee side with the scenario that we started with, John, where a practice has got a lot of Delta patients or a lot of Cigna patients or a lot of MetLife patients. One of the opportunities with those type of PPOs is that they are all examples of what are called tiered networks. They have multiple levels. So of course, Delta is the most obvious one. People are aware of the Delta Premier level and the lower Delta PPO level. But a lot of practices are not aware that a similar situation exists with Cigna and with MetLife and United Concordia as well. And even Aetna has different levels. So were that practice having 10 Delta patients a day, I would suggest from the fee standpoint that they should look at moving up a level. Are they eligible to move up to the Delta Premier level? As we've looked at the numbers over the years, very rarely does it not make sense to move up to the Premier level. A lot of doctors are still eligible. A lot of doctors who are practicing today at the PPO level are eligible to move up to the Premier level. And in that case, maybe you're then comfortable seeing more Delta patients if you can get a 25% increase. We ran the numbers for a doctor this morning, as a matter of fact, this exact scenario. The annual improvement is $148,000, meaning we took his top 30 revenue producing procedures, what his current Delta PPO fee is, and what the Delta Premier fee is. We checked, we made sure that he's eligible to move up to Delta Premier, and it's $148,000 of increased revenue. Well, that solves a lot of problems if we can do that. Similarly, Cigna or MetLife have options to move up to a level. They don't make it easy, but those are things from a fee standpoint that I would encourage anybody to look at. We have no expertise at all with what Teresa's talking about with getting claims paid. Oh, heaven forbid. If somebody asks me on that, I'm just going to say, get Teresa on the phone or get her book or whatever. And if they need coaching, I'm going to tell them to talk to you. But if they're just talking about the fees, good grief. First thing to look at is the ability to move up a level. And if we can get a 25% increase in fees there, staying in network with that plan suddenly doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah, one thing I'll say while we're on that subject is dental inflation is 5% a year, which means your costs as a dental business owner are going up 5% every year. The average rate of growth of the average dental practice in North America is 2 to 4%, which means if you're growing at 4%, your costs went up 5%. That means you're going down every year. That's the average practice. Okay. So one of the things that just completely solves that problem for everybody is to control your fee schedule. I can't count the number of practices I've walked into and their fees, don't even show up on the NDAS. And for those that aren't familiar with the NDAS, that's the National Dental Advisory Service. I want you to understand where this data comes from. This data is collected from insurance claims that are submitted to insurance companies, from specialists, GPs, from everybody. Okay. And essentially, I will give them your zip code and they will pull all of the data that came in within 10 miles around that zip code. These are all the claims that were submitted within your zip code. And then they put those fees into categories. So if you're in the 40th percentile, that means that 60% of the practices are charging more than you. If you're in the 50th percentile, then half of them are charging more than you. I strongly recommend for my clients to put their fees in the 80th percentile because most insurance plans, especially if you're working with Clint, most insurance plans will reimburse up to the 80th percentile. So if your fees are in the 70th percentile, you're leaving money on the table. Insurance plans will pay you more, but your fee is lower than what they would reimburse you. So at a bare minimum, I would set my fees at the 80th percentile, and then I would increase them annually. I see people a lot of times their fees will be in the 50th, and we've got to get them to the 80th, and they're like, "Well, I'll do 2% every so often until I get there." You'll never get there. Never. That number is going up faster than you're moving the needle. You'll never get there.
The other reference there that they might benefit from, John, is Fair Health.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Fair Health Consumer is a patient-facing website that patients can go to and look up their costs. But
Mm-hmm.
Fair Health Consumer also aggregates claims data. So if a doctor is submitting a claim to Aetna or Emeritus or Principal, after that claim's adjudicated, they take off the patient's name, they take off the doctor's name, and it goes into this repository where it's then stratified into the different percentiles. And yes, I'm a big believer in the 80th percentile for a GP, and understand that for a doctor who's participating with PPOs, what the insurances do there is they look at the 80th percentile and then they apply a percentage, and that percentage is driven by supply and demand. So if you're looking at the 80th percentile and there's a surplus of doctors in a geographic area, that PPO is going to make a doctor take 45% or 50% off of the 80th percentile. Mm-hmm. So having your fees at that 80th percentile for a general dentist is certainly something we would encourage. And if they were starting a practice, this makes a massive difference, because when you start a practice and you're going to insurance companies for that very first time, you don't want to show them the 40th percentile and say, that's what I'm charging, because they're going to make you offers on the 40th percentile. If you're a new practice owner, you're buying a practice, that's your chance. Standardize at the 80th percentile and then talk to the insurance companies and negotiate off of those. But if you negotiate off of 40, you're not going to probably ever get caught up. No matter how good we are at what we do, if you started at the 40th percentile and your insurance reimbursements were tied to that, we're not going to be able to get you up to the 80th percentile, because they have you captured at that point.
Yeah.
It's another good reason to make sure that you submit your full fees on every claim form, so that those numbers that they're both referencing are correct. If you're submitting your fee schedules, your negotiated fees, it's almost like you're pulling down the curve for everybody in the classroom. Always submit your full fees. ADA recommends it. Even the insurance carriers recommend it in all of their manuals. So please do.
Absolutely.
That's such a big deal. I just had this conversation with, I hate to put this spin on it, but this is reality. And this is a rhetorical question for the audience. Where do you think the ranges, if I'm an owner dentist and I need to figure out how much I pay an assistant or how much I pay a hygienist, where do you think those ranges come from? They come from national level data. Like, I'm going to websites and I'm finding out what the range for an assistant in this zip code is. How many years of experience does she have? I'm going to have a conversation with her. How good do I think she is? And then I'm going to have an objective part of my decision and a subjective part of my decision. Okay. Well, that's the number one thing that's heavily influencing that number is the control on payroll percentage nationally. And what the national data is saying is the appropriate, the appropriate wage to pay this particular person in this particular zip code. That percentage is driven by the fees that you are filing on your insurance claim. Because if you're filing insurance fees versus UCR fees, then your percentage payroll on your P&L is going to be higher as opposed to lower. The national average for payroll percentage, at least, I guess it's in the national average, this is about 13,000 dentists across the country. A study was done and it was 28%. And in our practices, we target somewhere between 20 and 25, depending on if there are benefits in place. Okay. That's a big factor. And if you are providing services, for example, if I'm a hygienist and technically I am doing SRP, but we are walking out a Profi code because the patient didn't want to pay the additional fee for SRP, I am devaluing my license. I am now telling the industry not to pay me more for what I do because I'm not worth it. I hate to put that description on it, but in reality, that is exactly what's happening. As a dental team, we are devaluing ourselves because we're not charging what we're worth when we walk the claim out. Okay. So if you want to give yourself a raise, don't ask the doctor. If you want to give every dental professional in the industry a raise, don't ask your doctors. Just charge what you're worth and file the appropriate fees. And it will
Paid
happen
on them.
organically.
Have Teresa help you get paid on it.
That's right.
Yeah.
My favorite thing to do, get you paid.
Yeah, it'll happen organically.
But that's not submitting the PPO fee that you brought up. That's one of the most common errors that we see in practices. It happens probably 30% of the time. And if you ask me what are some of the common PPO errors, that's going to be always on the top 5 most common errors.
Yeah.
I understand the reasoning. They want to know what their actual production is.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And I understand that, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
Sorry. In my mind, it's not enough. Yes. Run the reports.
Yeah. I think it's they try to eliminate the adjustment on the back end.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's a fraction of a minute that it takes to do that. But the value of the data that we lose is significant. Plus, if you're walking out the insurance fee, there's no way for you to go into the software and determine how much you're writing off on an insurance plan. And therefore, there's no way for you to determine if you're even making money on that insurance plan. You might be losing money on that insurance plan.
Right.
So that's critical. And so I would say definitely have your fees set in the 80th percentile. Definitely increase your fees at least annually. Don't do it every other year. Do it annually. Mm-hmm. If you stay below 12% statistically, psychologically, that's below the threshold of awareness. So if your increase in fees is less than 12%, 99.9% of people aren't even going to notice the fee went up. How many of you noticed that the price of a gallon of milk went up? You probably don't. But if you look at it from 3 years ago, you probably do. And it's because the threshold of awareness. Okay. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Trust us on this. The patients, you're going to think every patient's going to notice, and trust us on this. They don't. Yep. So keep your fee schedule current, and then talk to Clint every 2 to 3 years. Most insurance plans will renegotiate about every 2 to 3 years. Right. And you want to renegotiate every 2 to 3 years. So keep your fee schedule as current as possible, and keep your insurance reimbursements as current as possible. Amen. There you go. Love it. And make sure you're following Teresa's advice on making that you've got the appropriate chart notes and templates, filing the appropriate fees, having the appropriate diagnostic resources available to maximize the efficiency of getting the claim reimbursed. Clean claims, frictionless claims is what I like. Interestingly enough, I had 11 points on here, and we covered all 11 of them, in at least in some degree. Yay for us! The only thing that we didn't really touch on was, and we kind of did, was like insurance credentialing. And if I have 2 providers, is it possible for me to have 2 providers under one roof participating in different, one in network, one out of network? And that might be the complexity of that might be beyond the scope of this call, because that's more of the way the legal entity of the organization is set up, more so than it is just a strategy with insurance, dental insurance. I can share a bit on that, John, because we do a lot of work with associates coming into practices, and the opportunity to stratify insurance participation does exist, and we set it up fairly regularly. We would call that the law firm type approach, where I would pay a certain level for a paralegal, I would pay a certain level for a junior attorney, and I would pay the highest level for the senior partner in that practice. And I feel it's appropriate for dentistry as well. That doctor who's got 20 years of experience and has seen thousands and thousands of cases, and they've done thousands of crowns, they can easily justify having that higher fee. So for a lot of plans, we can put that into place. We can configure situations where, let's say with MetLife, we put the owner doctor at the high level, we put the associate at the low level. We do the same thing with Cigna. Sometimes you can do it with Delta, depending upon the state. Sometimes we just take the owner doctor out of PPOs completely and let them enjoy the fruits of all the clinical education that they've spent money on and their advanced clinical skills. But that is an opportunity for a lot of multi-doctor practices to do that multi-level insurance participation. It does take some setup up front, but
the difference in fees between, let's say, the low-level Cigna and the high-level Cigna, that's often $350 on the crown.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't make sense for both providers in a practice to be at the same level at the lower level when the senior doctor has kind of outgrown that. And the reality is, let's just take Cigna in my backyard. Somewhere near 77% of the policyholders with Cigna have the high fee plan. So it's not like the majority of the patients have the lower fee plan. The majority with Delta, Met, Cigna actually have the higher level. So there's a lot of reasons to pursue that strategy, in my opinion, of different levels of participation for an owner and an associate.
Yeah, and as far as the upfront setup, what you're referring to is the complexities with the national provider ID and the EIN number, and which two numbers does this particular plan need to see on the claim or on the insurance paperwork, because it changes from plan to plan. So that part's a little complex, and it's possible that you may have a situation set up depending on the insurance plans that you plan on participating with. It's possible that you may have to have a separate entity created with a separate EIN number. And then that EIN number has a relationship with a few insurance plans. And then the other EIN number has a relationship with a few insurance plans. And then that creates a whole host of accounting challenges too.
Sure.
So there are certainly some complexities there.
Yes.
Lots of them.
We're seeing a significant push for practices to have a type 2 NPI, right? A type 1 is always what goes on the claim in the rendering provider section. But the type 2 NPI is by definition for a multi-doctor practice or for a corporation. Even a solo doctor who's got an S or a C Corp should have a type 2 NPI. And that's what largely delineates a lot of that. So at this point, we see that, for instance, Delta is becoming much more stringent in some states on requiring a type 2 NPI, a multi-doctor NPI or a corporate NPI. And we see that as a trend that will likely continue. Teresa might have better insights into the processing complexities, but right now, when we credential an associate, the majority of the time, the insurance company is saying, what is their type 1 and the type 2 NPI of the practice?
Yes, I highly recommend both types. And that way, when an associate comes in my experience, Clint, it's made your job easier to have a type 2 already set up. And so I do recommend that for any startups. And most of them you don't see a lot of them just setting up without a corporation in place anyway. So why not go ahead and set that up that way? The other complexity, Jon, that you're probably alluding to is the conversations up front with the patients. And that's very complex. And you have to make sure that you have admin team that understands the setup, or it's a big ball of wax to take apart on the back end if they don't spot that there's been changes. Like say the claims come back and they're processed incorrectly. If they don't catch that immediately, that is a year-long process to untangle that. And so please make sure your admin team is ready and understands why you're so insistent on doing it this way and what the ramifications are.
Yeah, think of it like this for the audience. It's would essentially be two different practices operating under the same roof, sharing the same team. You would have two companies in your software. Two, maybe not.
No. I mean, that is pretty much it. That's really how you have to look at it. I mean, it would be together in many ways. You can have it in the same software. I've seen it set up that way. But when a patient comes up front and you know that patient wants to see Dr. Smith, if you schedule them with Dr. Jones and that fee is much higher, then there's a lot of dancing that goes around there too. And then you'll hear the inevitable question of, well, what's the difference between the two doctors? Right. And sounds like a simple question to answer until you're right in front of them going, one's not better, but you should go to him anyways, so it's a very interesting conversation.
The difference is whatever you want it to be.
Right. Yeah. So you need to train on that.
Clint, you mentioned credentialing. So let's touch on that really quick, and then we will have effectively covered every one of our talking points this evening. So in terms of if I'm buying a practice, when when do I need to start the credentialing process? What's that timeline look like? Or if I'm bringing an associate into my practice, what kind of timeline do I need to prepare for in terms of when they can actually start seeing patients? There is I don't even want to go into this, but there are some by the book and not by the book workarounds.
Yes.
This is being recorded, so I wouldn't dare make a comment that leaves any kind of a record, but I would simply say do it by the book. Right. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. So most credentialing right now is taking longer than it ever has due to COVID. We see situations where it used to be 90 days. It's now 120 days, depending upon your state, again, which I say a lot, but it does vary. In some situations, we're seeing credentialing of 8 months, certainly like Delta of Georgia right now, 6-7 months in some cases. So the doctor bringing in an associate should start way before that doctor ever picks up a handpiece. Now, that being said, that's not always possible. And so what we suggest and what we tell all providers is, look, you're going to get paid here, whether you're in network or not. And so what I can say, John, which I feel on good legal ground to say, because my dental specific attorney has written many things on this. It's okay for an associate to see patients out of network while they're getting credentialed and to utilize the PPO fees if that is being disclosed on the claim. And I believe it's box 35, the remarks section. But what we have a lot of our doctors do is, while that associate is getting credentialed, to just say to the patient, hey, Dr. Lewis is in the process of getting credentialed. He's going to have the same fees, or she's going to have the same fees as Dr. Jones. So right now we're going to extend those fees to you, and we're going to disclose that to your insurance company on box 35 of the claim. And my attorneys told me that's completely valid. Now, the other
very good.
way,
I was unaware of that. That's different.
Yeah.
Okay,
the other less legal ways that you are referring to, we would highly discourage, because we see over the years a number of doctors who've gotten in trouble trying to fudge who the rendering provider is or changing information. So if you're going to buy a practice, the good thing is you're going to have cash flow coming in from basically 2 weeks after you buy the practice as an out-of-network provider, and then just look to honor those fees and disclose it. And that way the insurance company is fully aware of what's happening there. But I would discourage any practice from a scenario where they don't let a doctor see patients until they're fully credentialed. As long as they have a valid dental license and they're not seeing an HMO patient, most of the time they're going to be paid. And it's difficult to have a doctor sit on the sidelines for 3 to 4 months while they're waiting to be credentialed.
This is a situation where a lot of times you'll hear, my buddy down the street, to your point, John, my buddy down the street at the Dental Society, they were able to do it this way, so it shouldn't be a problem. And they do get caught. I mean, I've been in the horror stories too. Some carriers will actually tell you maybe 2 months beforehand or a month beforehand to hold your claims until everything's settled. Like once you get closer, hold your claims and then submit them all. So I'm not a fan of that, but you could, it's up to you. You have to figure out what's right for you. And then the other thing, I know one office, the dentist coming on board, she did hygiene because she wasn't licensed and they were really early in credentialing. And so she just did a lot of hygiene. She got to know a lot of patients. That still hurts because, you want them producing dollar monies, but at the same time, there was a hygiene shortage in that office. And so it worked out just fine. So there's different ways you can do it. Creativity is fun sometimes, right?
There's different ways you can do it legally. Too.
Legally, yes, legally.
We've all seen the. I just had one last week, and I warned the doctor, and he bought the practice from a family member, and he came on board with us as a new client, and lo and behold, he just got the really nasty notice from the IRS. And both he, as the buyer, as well as the seller, his family member, are both being audited now for fraudulent information, and fraudulent earnings. So it's something everybody stresses about, but I would say take a breath, and there's ways to work through it and for it to work out pretty well. Just
And if it puts your dental license or your hygiene license in jeopardy, don't guess.
Yeah.
Right. Talk to a professional, a paid, trained professional. If it costs you a little bit of money, trust me, it's going to be worth it. You've invested a lot of time and energy and money into acquiring that licensing. Don't jeopardize that. Don't risk that. Just be smart. So fantastic. So I'm looking at, we've got 7:51. So we carried just about 2 hours. I don't see any questions in the chat. So I take that to mean that we did a phenomenal job.
We blew them away.
And filling people in on what they didn't know. Very pleased with our conversation this evening. I thought we covered a lot of ground. We got into some detail, a very, very broad conversation. So it was, I enjoyed it. This has been recorded. I do want to thank the two of you for spending the time with me. I know how busy you are, and I'm grateful that you chose to invest some of that time with me this evening and with our audience. This meeting has been recorded. With your permission, Teresa and Clint, I will upload it to our YouTube channel.
Absolutely.
So you can certainly click on the link there. Everybody that's in attendance this evening, I've got your email addresses. Brittany will be sending out CE. So you will be receiving those. We're driving to Charlotte for a training university tomorrow. It'll probably be first of next week before those CEs go out. But I promise you the CEs will go out. You'll get 2 full CE credits, completely complimentary, of Odyssey Management, Profitable PPOs, and Fortune Management. And again, thanks to everybody for spending some time with us this evening. We hope you got a lot of good pearls and wisdom out of it, and we hope it was a valuable investment of your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.